Good evening, everybody. Tonight we're speaking to Nicholas Woode-Smith, a local fiction author, prolific one at that, and editor and founder of the Rational Standard, a libertarian newspaper for South Africa and South African topics. Good evening. Anything you'd like to add to that?
Thanks for having me on tonight. I'm looking forward to the discussion. And before my fellow co-founders of the Rational Standard get angry, I'm only a co-founder.
Yes. Well, wouldn't want to be anything more than primus inter pares, ne?
Or disclaimer, my Afrikaans is kak.
Well, that was Latin, so I don't think you have to worry. Shit, what was I going to say? Yeah, so Rational Standard, how did that get started? I understand that you were a student of economic history at UCT at first. And I've seen a few photographs of you standing in front of a lecture hall with a big portrait of Hayek on your shirt.
Hayek, and despite it saying Hayek, a lot of people say, is that Hitler? And I'm like, no, not every white guy with a mustache is Hitler.
Oh, sure, but...
so we started, so the Rational Standard officially started in 2016, but unofficially it started in 2015 with a site called the SA Libertarian. So the SA Libertarian started with a Facebook page, which I started in high school, and then some of the co-founders then found me through it, and they started helping me with it. And we felt there wasn't a platform for libertarian ideas or classical liberal ideas in South Africa. So we founded this website to start publishing articles and to start pushing our evil libertarian agenda on the public. And in 2015, people will remember, that's when the Roads Must Fall and Fees Must Fall process started in earnest. And we started to become very successful because we were the only platform that was actually condemning the protests. We actually started almost as a response to the Daily Maverick, which before then used to be good, with Ivor Vector being a really good columnist, which probably one of the biggest influences for my local politics. But when Daily Maverick lost the plot, we decided there's no actual platform for people with ideas that support freedom, individualism, rational policies, and free markets. So we founded the site SA Libertarian. And then in January of 2016, we decided that we wanted to appeal to more people. So we decided to do some amazing deceitful marketing and rename it from the SA Libertarian to the Rational Standard. Officially, it was actually not really a rename. It was founding a new company. And it flew and it just took off. Because for a long time, we were the only people discussing these ideas in South Africa. We were the only platform that would publish those ideas. And I must say that I supported the protest in the instance that they gave us a lot of views and ad revenue. I'm very sad that they're over because people hated the protests, and because of that, they started supporting us. And we got a hang of a lot of amazing writers who have moved on to way more established organizations like the Institute of Race Relations, AfriForum, Free Market Foundation. And so the Rational Standard has been going strong since then. And now we have a lot more competition with all these wonderfully right-wing podcasts around, things like the Renegade Report, the Young Cape now here, and also with the Institute of Race Relations Daily Friend. So we have a lot more competition. But our goal was to create a voice for libertarians and classical liberals. So I'd say we won to a degree.
All right, excellent. So considering that you're pushing libertarianism, I think a lot of people are going to immediately respond, well, those who are not already in our corner would probably respond and say, yes, but what you're doing then is you're protecting white privilege, you're protecting capital, you're protecting inequality. How would you respond to that? And how do you think that libertarianism serves the man on the Clapham omnibus?
So a lot to unpack there. First, I'll go with the race issue. So libertarianism is not an ideology for any particular race. On the contrary, it almost, I wouldn't say rejects race, but race is irrelevant in the libertarian paradigm. It's about individual rights. It's about individual freedom. And it's about the recognition that no one person should have the right and does not have the actual knowledge to be able to rule over others completely. If there's going to be any sort of government, it's going to be a small government of compromise rather than a totalitarian government that's going to direct how people live. This has nothing to do with race. And I think that it doesn't matter what the color of your skin is, we all deserve to live free. And there was another one mentioned there, which is defending capital. Well, I think, yes, the goal of if there is going to be a government, it needs to protect people's justly acquired wealth. That's kind of, and I think we can agree with that if you own something, I presume you like owning things, you don't want people to take your things. So not even either, libertarians would support your right to defend your property from others, to defend yourself, and if there's going to be a government, to have an efficient police force and army to prevent raiders and warlords from taking your stuff. Then there was what was the last issue there? Well, there was a few others, but...
Oh, yes. How is this going to impact the lives of people on the ground? How do libertarian ideas serve them?
So let's actually go how they've positively influenced people already. So now there's no perfect libertarian society out there, but that's actually because there's no such thing as any perfect ideological society. There's never been a purely communist society. Thank the Lord for that. There's never been a purely fascist society, which also thank the Lord for that. No, because governments are ultimately imperfect, and that's actually something that's protecting us from them. Can you imagine if our governments could perfectly oppress us? And also, it's not in the interest of rulers in order to give freedom to the people underneath them. There's things that they want to be able to control. Either they want to be able to extract wealth, or they want to be able to conscript troops so they can use people in their little wars to gain power, just to paint a map for their own narcissism. The Prince is a really good book, by the way, by Niccolo Machiavelli. I'd say it's probably one of the most important books to read on politics. Oh, do you have it over there?
No. I just in case I forget things, I like to write little notes.
Actually, no, I would advise everyone reads Niccolo Machiavelli's The Prince. I have an article on the Rational Standard called the Prince and Libertarianism, or the importance of Machiavelli and libertarianism. It's basically discusses why you shouldn't really trust rulers and why you shouldn't trust the idea of power. And the people who have power, it's not necessarily that power corrupts. It's just that people who want power are corruptible. But I digress a lot. I always digress when Machiavelli is involved. So things where libertarian ideas have positively influenced people. The idea of civil rights, where people are not allowed to just enslave you on the spot, where you have a right to own property, where you have political and social freedoms. We have the right to basically live life and at least make an attempt to pursue happiness. The idea of the rule of law is classical liberal, and classical liberalism and libertarianism are completely ingrained. I would say if there is a difference, it's that libertarianism is more radical, where classical liberals believe there's a slightly more role for the state in protecting people's rights. Libertarians would say that we cannot trust the state, so we need to either compromise with them or completely wipe them out. And there's a lot of debates in libertarianism about that. I would say I'm theoretically an anarchist, because I do not trust the state. I do not think states are good, but I think that and I don't think they're necessary either, but I think they're inevitable. They're going to happen anyway. I think they're a natural way for humans to form. I think organizations are natural, and I think there's always going to be someone who's going to rise to the top. So I'd rather compromise with the government than try to waste my time wiping them out like anarchists would do. Now, ways there where people on the ground could benefit from more libertarianism is that it's additionally more freedoms, more things that they can do that they want to do without government interference. For example, being able to, for adults to be able to consensually put currently illicit substances into their body, which is basically almost arbitrarily banned. For example, cannabis. You don't have to like cannabis to recognize that it's very arbitrary to think that people should be allowed to drink alcohol but not consume cannabis. And so there's an initial debate there. So the topic of drug legalization or decriminalization is inherently a libertarian one. the idea of gun rights. So so this should resonate with a lot of South Africans, where we know the police are not capable of defending us. So we need to have our own weapons so we can defend ourselves from criminals, but also inevitably from the corrupt policemen who want to bribe. So gun rights will help protect people who cannot be protected by other institutions because the institutions are failing, and also protect them from the institutions themselves if it gets even worse. There's also a weakening of state is almost always good for civil society. So you want a dissolution of power, because even if you believe a government's good, it's still more efficient if it's on a local level. And decentralization is ultimately a liberal and libertarian principle. And even if you're a fascist, it's more efficient to have a local fascist mayor than it is to have some guy sitting in the capital 100 kilometers away dictating upon your little village where he doesn't know what's going on. So decentralization benefits everyone, even if it's still, to a lot of people, it still seems pie in the sky. And the list goes on. So just think, do you like freedom? Do you like prosperity? I sound like a copywriter now. Then vote libertarianism, but don't vote because voting is bad.
Okay, interesting one. Now, there are the big criticism, of course, from people who are on the ground is they say, well, we don't have opportunities that other people have. What's the state going to do for us?
Well, the thing is, what the state should do, if there's going to be a state, is basically their job is to defend your life and your property from aggressors, be it domestic aggressors or foreign, so police or army, and also to establish a set of norms where basically basically establishing a legal system and help the arbitration of that legal system. Now, there's actually movements in the libertarian movement that actually believe in a private legal system. Now, I actually think that theoretically they're good. The problem is that they require an actual consent between people, and sometimes you actually need to have a court case where the one person really doesn't want to be on trial. So so it's good to have I wouldn't say centralized, but it's good to have a form of legal system which is generally agreed upon within a geographical area, so people know what they're dealing with. So Hayek discusses this idea. I'm not going to go into detail about it, but discusses the importance of a rule of law and being able to have a consistent legality so you understand what's going on. So that's what they're doing with you to defend your rights, even if you don't start with the same opportunities. They say so men are not born equal when it comes to wealth, but they are born equal when it comes to legal rights. And so obviously there are going to be flaws because life isn't perfect. And any person who tries to criticize an ideology by saying, well, that's not, life doesn't work that way, there's going to be corruption and stuff. Well, then no ideology should have any leg to stand on. Ideology's job is to set a framework of an ideal that you head towards. Even if you're never going to hit it, it's good to have a plan. So I play a lot of online competitive games, and I'll say a bad plan is always better than no plan. Unless it's communism, then I'd rather have no plan. But
it's interesting you said.
Yep.
It's interesting to say that. I mean, there's very much a position amongst the right wings, and I mean we covered some of the left wing sort of criticisms briefly and very crudely, but the right wing sort of criticism of this would be to say that the bad plans will impose themselves on you. I mean, you mentioned Machiavelli. There's a famous collection of people who've been referred to as the Machiavellians, like Burnham, Pareto, Michel, and Mosca, who talk about the fact that society is directed by elites that operate through institutions, and these institutions can become subverted, and they have a natural interest in consolidating power, particularly in the economy. So the question then, particularly considering there's something we mentioned before we got on air, which is that it's very rare that the sort of leftward trajectory of most societies, the expansion of welfare, redistribution, regulation, and so on, is arrested through democratic processes, largely because it's very, very easy to appeal to people and say, well, you're not getting your fair share. I promise to deliver you unicorns and rainbows. So do you have any response to the sort of right-wing criticisms of libertarianism as something that is naive and doesn't have a prepared defense against subversion and how should I put it, perverse incentives?
So we discuss this a lot with between people who identify as conservative and people who identify as libertarians, even though it's I say that kind of actually the same, with just with a few aesthetic differences. But this is one of the more valid criticisms against liberalism and libertarianism, is that it is a soft ideology, and because it's a soft, by soft I mean it's passive. It doesn't tell you exactly what to do. It doesn't say this is how you lead your life. The idea of libertarianism is the assumption that we don't actually know how people should live their lives, so we need to leave them to let themselves discover that for themselves. And in the sense of marketing, that just doesn't sell well, as people who say the state's going to look after you, you are a part of the collective, together we are strong, or other types like maybe like the theocrats, where you'll say that we are strong by the grace of God and that our identity is Christianity and stuff like that. Liberals and libertarianism is an idea of how a society should be governed, not how people should live. And because of that, it does not appeal to the masses, because it's not romantic, it's not individually compelling, and it is definitely an intellectual ideology. Which is very ironic.
Neither bread nor circuses.
Exactly. It's one of those ironic things, though, that Marxism in its actual form is extremely overly intellectual. So the intellectual yet stupid, yet idiot. But the Marxists were lucky enough to have a lot of very good orators and very good marketers who were able to distill it down to its simplest form. And I think that is possible to a degree with libertarianism. And I think it is happening. We do see in the United States, especially, people who are able to distill libertarianism to appeal to the masses. And while I love people like Ludwig von Mises and Hayek, I think people like Milton Friedman were much more valuable when it came to spreading those ideas, because they were very good at communicating them to people in a way that they understood it. And
yes, in terms of the way I understand it is there's a because the big thing that you picked up on about Marxists is one of the things they do is they distill every one of their complex theories down to elemental components of morality. So they talk about absolute democracy, withering the state away to create a perfectly equal society devoid of internal alienation and division. They talk about the right to own the products of your labor and not have them distributed amongst those who facilitate that that labor organization. And I think that libertarianism, I know that there are people who've done this, like Robert Nozick, but it seems to me that it's a very little touched upon aspect of libertarianism is the moral principles upon which it bases itself.
So a big thing with the libertarians is that people who tend to embrace libertarianism tend to be the philosophy types. And this is why a lot of people get irritated by the libertarian movements, because there's so much internal debate all the time. Because there's a lot of contrarians who like to just come up because they don't like the Republicans, they don't like the Democrats, they join the Libertarian Party and then they just confuse everyone. And but then you get to people just genuinely, because it's a soft ideology and we don't know the way forward, that leaves a lot of room to debate what is the right way forward. And because no one's there forcing a gun to someone to tell them, no, stop now, that's the right way forward, we could stop talking now, the debate just continues. And the Marxist intellectuals have a very big advantage when it comes to spreading the ideals and arguing, is that they don't know what the hell they're talking about. So there's never any self-questioning. And whenever you try to actually argue with them on a topic, they don't know what you're talking about, so they don't know how to reply, so they just continue with their talking points. So like the labor theory of value. Anyone
the phlogiston theory of value, more like...
Anyone with a bit of sense knows that the labor theory of value has no legs to stand on, but Marxists still use it, and they still think it's great because they don't put any research into their own ideology, I
Mm.
know very few actual Marxists who have ever read Marx. I have read Marx, unfortunately. It's dreadful. He's a terrible writer. Um, and
Okay.
and if you have 8 different interpretations of one essay, that's not good writing. That's terrible writing. But yeah, no, so, that's an aside as well. I think you could have an entire podcast series just complaining about Marx as a person, and just ignoring his ideology. But I think this is one of the biggest problems with the libertarian movement is that we're too smart for our own good. And if you understand a complex theory, it can actually be very hard for you to be able to communicate it to someone who doesn't understand it. So that's why it's a big problem that a lot of libertarians come to libertarianism to Austrian economics. I love Austrian economics and I love economics. But the problem is most people don't. And most people don't understand it and they don't want to understand it. So when you talk to them about the virtues of price signals, they don't care. And that doesn't, so they're raw. So when you tell them, when you have to choose between, you need price signals to basically direct the market in a way efficiently, and then you tell someone else, we're just going to give you bread, they're probably going to go to the guy who gives them bread, even though the bread's going to run out tomorrow.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I pick up on that front is that seems to travel quite well is actually the idea of hard currency and why it's bad to print money. Because I mean, we've all lived within shouting distance of Mugabe, so we all see that the effects of that, and everyone living in South Africa sees the effect of our sort of gentle quantitative easing on the price of bread and meat. So I think that one tends to travel well domestically. But yeah. I mean, I found it funny that you criticized Marx for his bad writing. I mean, after all, you would know you do this for a living.
Yes, yeah. It's so I write fiction, but I also write a lot of articles where I'm trying to communicate ideas to people. And then I also studied. So I had to read a lot of academics, and I must say I don't know how they got degrees. I don't know how they got any readers in the first place. I'm not even saying it's just boring. It's just a lot of times incomprehensible. So there's an essay by Marx called the Jewish Question. I think that's the name.
Oh
Yeah, the Jewish
yeah.
Question. And when we were discussing that in political philosophy, there was 8 different interpretations of one essay, and that's not good writing. I can understand if the context was really different. So if he was from thousands of years ago and we were trying to discuss certain illusions and allegories and stuff, but no, it's Marxism's not that old. I've read plenty of books which are far older than Marx, and they read way better. I've read Shakespeare. Shakespeare makes more sense than Marx a lot of the time. And a lot of people think that's
Well,
borderline.
Marx comes from Germany and he read Hegel. I mean, Hegel give brain
Yes,
damage
yeah.
at 1,000 paces.
I must say it is also a little bit of that German. So Germans have this habit of extremely long sentences, which does not translate well into English. So they will have an entire sentence, an entire paragraph, but like this long on a page, which is just one sentence. And they have a very long word that roughly translates to snake sentences, which refers to that writing habit. So Austrian Germans, from what my experience of reading their writers, tend to be better. Ludwig von Mises and Hayek and Karl Popper, all actually quite easy to read. I enjoyed their writing, reading in English. But people like Kant and Marx, just really hard to get through. Just it's a chore to get through them.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that because there's a fellow called oh God, I can't remember his first name, but his surname's Michael John. And when he was 17, he was a London-based Jew, and he translated the entirety of Kant's work into English, and he did such a great job that it's still the standard translation today. And not only that, but a lot of German people actually study his English translation because the German was so badly written.
Yeah, no, I've heard this. It was said in our lectures about Kant, and that's the only reason I was able to get through some Kant was by his translations. But then he also wanted us to do like an almost, but they also wanted us to read like a direct translation, so we could see how badly written it is. I think that also because they didn't want us to like Kant because he's white.
Ugh, yeah, but I mean, he also had that whole sort of weird racial classification thing going that I think irks people today quite somewhat.
Yeah, but this is the big problem with. I do think people have to see history in context. I think it's if you're not going to contextualize morality within certain time periods, everyone is an arsehole, and we're going to be arseholes in the future when we discover that all animals were actually super sentient, holy beings that we've been mass producing and consuming. And I think that while we can look at Hitler and say he was completely evil, I think it's a lot more dangerous to look at people like Genghis Khan and say he was this evil person, because it's so far removed and the context is much more different. I don't know if there's objective morality, but I do know that humans don't have access to it.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. I mean, you call your paper the rational standard, but I mean, I don't know if this is sort of the time to harp on about things that are very as abstract as this, but I always take the position that reason really is just a descriptive faculty, and that the fundamental way that human beings function has nothing to do with reason at all. Reason is just there to communicate and provide models.
So the way that I view morality is that I think it evolves, and I think it evolves as a tool to enable human flourishing. And I think that we see morality develop through the ages because the morality that works for us is the morality that survives. I might be moved to veganism. Sorry, I like that comment.
Like, I mean, you're also a UCT student. You'll have known about the legend of David Benatar, how all of his postgrad students convert to veganism.
So I got along well with David Benatar. So I'm not an antinatalist. I have problems with antinatalism, but it's one of those things where when he debated Jordan Peterson, I was on David Benatar's side because Jordan Peterson just completely missed the plot. He wasn't engaging with the actual topic. So I was like, damn it, why are you making me support antinatalism here? But yeah, no, I got along well with David Benatar. I think he was a very good lecturer, very smart person, very good columns on Politics Web, and I would say definitely one of the best professors at UCT.
Certainly one of the most principled. I remember at the time it was only the philosophy department and the engineering department who said no to this wave of insanity that sort of swallowed us up back in 2015.
Yeah, the mathematics department tried and failed.
Yeah, no, I mean that's the problem with maths. It's too rational. But they're subject to any form of crooked reasoning if it's internally consistent. But it's so. I mean, like we're talking a lot about morality, but I seem to remember there's a quote that I remember a lot from Christopher Hitchens. Who said that morality is not best dealt with cold hard logic, but sort of told through stories, through fiction. So fiction is the way in which we learn about morality as adults. I mean, aside from making catastrophic errors that destroy half our lives. And I mean, you as a fiction writer will have some insight into this. And I, from perusing the reviews of your books on Amazon, as sort of a cheap way of preparing, I noticed a lot of people picked up on your injection of moral philosophy into a few of your novels, particularly in the Kat Drummond series. And I was wondering, sort of, how much of that is spontaneous? How much of it do you sort of put it into it? And is there, how do you personally go around sort of portraying morality?
So I would say that I use Kat as a tool to explore morality in a lot of ways, and I would be lying if I say I plan all of that from the start. Now I am a big planner, but a lot of times through the book, I actually have to stop because I realize that Kat is figuring something out, or me through Kat. And I think that my conclusion with that is that through writing Kat Drummond, and it has been a big development because I didn't really know this, I hadn't really figured this out while I was writing it, that morality is really messy. When I was a student, I thought it was just, just black and white, really easy. There's good, there's bad. There's the right thing to do, the wrong thing to do. But a big lesson of the Kat Drummond series is it's a lot more complicated than that, and that there's good people do bad things for the right reasons, and there's bad people do good things for the wrong reasons, and that also there's very few people who are so evil that they can't find some sort of redemption, and also at the end of the day that everyone is the main character of their own story, and that's there's very few people who are going to actively see themselves as the bad guy. Kat is a damaged character whose and her journey is to basically overcome her own trauma and her own basically things that would drive a lot of people to do bad things, and overcome it to try to be the best person within her own discovery of morality. And I think that now that I think about it, as you say that Christopher Hitchens says that you shouldn't use cold hard logic to discover morality. I think morality in a way is discovered through experience, it's discovered through interaction, and through trial and error to a large extent. And the series is basically Kat going through there. There's no decent place to stand in a massacre, they say. Yeah, exactly. And it is... so I do go into the philosophy a lot because I need to justify my degree somehow. So I go into the, I would say moral philosophy the most. I do go into political philosophy a lot. Kat is obviously, she's probably a little more libertarian than me because she's is an anarchist. And I think to a degree that I feel a little bit safe, sitting at my computer. And in general, I would kind of like an efficient police force to protect me. It would be a lot cheaper than having to hire private security, a lot less stressful than having to clutch my gun every few seconds, aiming out the window.
I suppose a character that is a private security, in a manner of speaking, a member of private security, probably would favor private security.
Exactly. Well, she's a private monster hunter, and she hates the police because the police do not do their jobs properly, and if they do their jobs properly, then they take work away from her. So,
that's an interesting point because you based it in sort of a future version of Cape Town, didn't you?
So it's more an alternative version. So there's a little bit of alternative history, but it's technically in the future. But that's because I wanted diverging timelines, mostly because I didn't want to have anyone basically come up and say, "Oh, you predicted that wrong." And I'm like, well, no, it's a different universe. And it's actually only really late in the series where you first get a date of when it's actually set, because I wanted it in a way to seem a little bit timeless. But it's so if I'll give a little short summary because I enjoy this for because it's set in Cape Town, but this Cape Town, due to what's happened in this universe, is a lot larger. So that there's that space. There's almost a slightly empty space between Stellenbosch and Somerset West, and those outlying towns around Cape Town.
Yes, towards the western end, yeah.
So due to a huge diaspora because of almost apocalyptic event, all that area is just filled in now with urban development. So Cape Town still exists as more a CBD, but they've now started to call this entire mega city Hope City. I did that to a degree because it's the word hope actually works better for search engine optimization. So that was a little bit of that when I was planning it, but it's kind of grown on me. There's also an in-universe funny reason why they renamed the city, and it's mostly that an insane prime minister basically used magic to rename the city, and they're basically like, well, damn it, now we can't rename it again. I could go on for hours explaining the law, so that's why I'm kind of trying to back away. But
no, don't worry about it. We're actually here to. That's part of the reason I'm here to talk to you about it. Well, this is kind of a culture magazine, and one of the big things is that you're very big into your British history and your British colonial history, and I'm interested in how that and sort of the way that you perceive English South African culture has actually impacted the way you write about the Cape.
So what's very interesting about Cape English, Cape British culture is a lot of people don't think it exists. And that's because, to a large degree, it's almost like a default position. It's kind of like saying a lot of people say America doesn't have a culture. But the thing is, because America is the cultural hegemon of the world, that it's become the default culture. And even though the Cape English are a vast minority, if you engage with commerce in this country, if you engage with entertainment, you're engaging with English culture. And so there's some very interesting parts and some historical anecdotes which I would like to mention about the Cape English. So the British Empire was actually quite a religious empire. There were Anglicans, there were Christian, and a big part of the British Empire was sending out missionaries to save the savages and civilize them. And a part of civilization was Christianity and commerce. That was their motto. You bring the cross and you bring trade posts. But the Cape English are very secular. And I was reading in this book, The Farewell of the Trumpets by Jan Morris, that the reason that the Cape English are actually quite secular compared to their Australian, Canadian, and English cousins is because the local Afrikaners were so religious that it actually alienated the English settlers and pushed them towards secularization. So, which I found very interesting, because being Cape English, so I'm one of the people who I do try to examine what does it mean to be Cape English. And I think it's definitely a degree of secularization. So that does not necessarily mean atheism. Now, I am atheist, but I know plenty of Christians who do have the same idea of secularization that I do, that religion is something deeply personal, that should stay out of the government and shouldn't be forced upon people. There's also a large degree, sadly, of over-trust in institutions, which is something which I don't share with my Cape English brethren, where the Cape English are obsessed with, I think it's because they've been privileged enough to be run under a good bureaucracy. The Cape has had a better bureaucracy than the rest of Southern Africa from almost day one. Well, from day one, because it was the first bureaucracy, and it's got the oldest and most well-established tradition in Southern Africa. And we can see that today, that I don't think it really matters what party is in charge of the Cape unless they're going to be doing extreme radical changes. As long as the civil administration in the Cape remains the same, I think there's a political culture here that allows it to be so well run. And this is something that, because the Cape English love strong institutions. It's a very Norse and yeah. So just reading the comment down there. Yeah, no, secularism is not about.
When you say Norse, you mean like the Dane Law and things like that.
Yeah. So just actually to go back to that, I would actually say that the Protestant Reformation was, to a large degree, very secularist, because it is removing the centralized control of religion and bringing it more to a personal relationship, which I like. I think that, even as an atheist, I think that a personal relationship with Jesus is a lot more compelling than my personal relationship with my priest, who has his personal relationship with his bishop, who has his personal relationship with his cardinal, who then has his personal relationship with the Pope. But back to some other cultural aspects. I think another aspect which is a little bit fun is about Cape English, is that we are very introverted. The Cape English are not big team players. And this is one of the big reasons why a lot of people don't think that there's a Cape English culture, is because we tend to stay away from each other and from other people because we just want to do our own thing. And
this is an incredible thing, because I've had a fascination with the sort of like it's a fascination in the sense of I really powerfully hate her. It's Oliver Schreiner. And she has this really, really visceral spite towards all of the other white people in South Africa. She sort of thinks are far more prejudiced and backward than her, and she longs to escape to England, where all of the other people who are enlightened like she is lives. And all of her books are sort of studded with these sort of grotesque caricatures of every other sort of ethnicity. especially the black people who are so put upon by everyone, and only she understands their pain. And I see this sort of feature following through into more recent times with people like Nadine Gordimer, who, like her novel July's People, which comes across as an almost masturbatory fantasy of saying, haha, you see, I understand how unjust everything is and would be when the tables are turned. And when she talks about that book in interviews, you can watch that sort of self-satisfied smile play across her face. And for me, like, I say this as someone who is very, very English, excruciatingly English as a South African. And I've noticed this as perhaps I'm becoming meta-Anglo and sort of turning against my own kind. But when you say introverted and sort of not being a team player, this seems to be part of the same psychology for me, as a desire to sort of elevate oneself a little bit by retreating. And I think that one of the things I've noticed is that English people are far less comfortable with invasions of personal space than every other kind of person in South Africa.
Oh, look, we have a guest. Hello. Say hello to the people on the internet.
Oh, hello. How unfortunate.
Okay. Dave, I think another problem with the introversion, and it's something that Joburg English don't really understand, it seems. Because a big complaint a lot of Joburgers have with Cape Town is they say it's hard to make friends. And that you can't really just go and befriend everyone on the street. You can't go to the club and just immediately be integrated into a friendship circle.
Yes.
When the thing about Cape Town is we very ingrained. You become friends with people at school, then university, and then maybe a workplace later on, and nowhere else. You don't meet people on the streets, but you do. That doesn't mean impoliteness. And this is something which they conflate that with rudeness. Where I'll say that I've never had any really big problems with the idea of people being polite. Like, I've always seen people always say hi on the streets, regardless of race, and people are friendly with each other. It's just, we're not going to go out of your way to be like, hello, stranger, I'm going to be your friend now.
Come in, have the delicacies from my parlor.
Exactly. But I think this is also one of the big problems why it's so hard to mobilize the Cape English, is because they don't want to go out, put themselves out there, and privacy is a good measure of civilization. No, I agree. No, the thing is, I'm an individualist, but that doesn't mean I don't like community. It just means I want my community to stay out of my business.
Go home of the day and not hang out until midnight.
So it's it's also very interesting why that developed. Is that if you look at the geography of the Cape, it's separated by mountains and it's isolated by the ocean, and because of that, it's very easy to hide, and it's very easy to live in a secluded suburb where you're flanked by the mountains and the forests, and then there's so much to do where you don't ever need to actually speak to someone. When all of the entertainment in the rest of South Africa, you have to interact with other people, which I find very upsetting. Like, it'd be it's really nice to just go hiking on the mountain where you're connecting to nature and all that spiritual doohickey. And I think that's informed Cape culture to a large extent, is that we are very content in our own company. And that means that we're not going to form a revolution and tear down Parliament because we would rather stay home and read.
Yeah, no, I see this as well. But one of the weird things about Cape Town, when you're talking about it being geographically kind of isolated, there's a lot of talk about apartheid sort of city planning, which obviously plays its role. But one of the things that I've noticed is even amongst the neighborhoods that are, supposedly on the one side of that fence, they also just keep in their little bubbles, and everyone's easy going with each other. You visit someone in Lenasia, no one gives a damn. You visit someone in any other part of you visit someone on the other side of the Boereworskut, and no one gives a damn. But each neighborhood really has its own little microculture going on, and I mean, I keep thinking of how for decades OBS managed to remain this kind of hedonistic hippie environment without much change for so long. When you think that would sort of move around a bit.
But that's what I like about Cape Town, is that it's an organic city. It's a city where communities formed without actually being forced. Because the idea of apartheid planning, yes, there was, because we had apartheid, but the Cape has always been has always been disrespectful of the South African central government. It's always been like, oh yeah, no, we'll support apartheid, but then they will not enforce the laws at all.
Or they'll all vote for the opposition consistently, like they did throughout most of the period.
And the Cape has always been the contrarian compared to the South African Empire. Empire saying in a disparaging sense, not like the glorious British Empire sense. But also the very telling thing about the so-called apartheid planning of Cape Town is the vast majority of these townships, which they call as a result of apartheid planning, post-apartheid. So, and a lot of them are linked to this idea of taking over constituencies by moving in voters into those areas, so then your candidates can win that area. And this has happened throughout.
Yes, I mean, I've seen a lot of it.
It's like, so for example, in Hout Bay, they moved, and the big problem is they move an unsustainable number of people to places where there are no jobs. And so it's central planning at almost its worst. Actually, no, it's not near to its worst. Central planning is worse as genocide. But it is one of the crimes of central planning where they think they can just move people to areas and use them as pawns in their politics. And it results in poverty, it results in crime, and it results in these communities which are not really communities because they have been people basically promised something they cannot get in these central planning at its best. No, I'd say that let's be a little bit charitable to central planning and say that central planning at its best is making bombs or something which can be dropped on people we don't like. That's me being charitable to central planning. And even then, they don't do it that well. I remember reading divide the number of kills that the US military has in Afghanistan, and divide and then see the budget for the Afghanistan conflict, and they are paying an exorbitant amount for a kill. And most of these kills are collateral damage as well. It's
that's a very Robert McNamara way of analyzing war, isn't it?
No, but I'll say that the only actual valid purpose of government could probably be war. That's supposed to be their thing. That's the government's thing, is to wage wars. And they're not even that good at it. The private sector is better than governments at the thing that governments exist to do. And obviously they shouldn't be good. They shouldn't be killing innocent people regardless. But if you're going to do it, at least do it efficiently. And but yeah, I think very off topic there. And
rather grim.
Is grim. I think the thing about Cape culture is when we talk about that, there's a lot of friendliness around the chat looks like a vine. I haven't heard about vines for a long time.
Where did they go? Someone didn't manage their finances properly, I expect.
Exactly. That is the problem. TikTok replaced them. And then for the longest time, I didn't know what TikTok was. And I felt like such a boomer. And I still feel like a boomer because I don't understand why people like TikToks. And that's why I feel like a boomer now. So basically people interacting across culture, but still having their own microcosm communities. And I do find that maybe it's because I'm Capetonian, I'm used to this, but I find that the social capital and the social trust is much larger in most of Cape Town. Next set of arguments is in the future, libertarians want to kill us efficiently. That's not libertarians, that's me. That's the thing of libertarianism isn't that specific. No, my thing is that if you're going to have bad ideas, at least try to make your bad ideas as good as possible. It's kind of like Nazism is disgusting and terrible. But not only that, they're also incompetent and didn't know how to actually wage war properly. And that Hitler was a terrible war leader.
I thought in particular the my hair's being a bitch again. But the one thing that struck me about the Nazis' sort of governance plan is mainly to take on massive amounts of debt and then pay it off by stealing everybody else's stuff extremely violently. And that just sounds
if you win.
It's I mean, can you imagine how much debt they would have been saddled with even if they won? I mean, it would have been a global depression for like a generation.
And it wasn't sustainable because the problem with central planning is, and not the Nazis were central planners, is that no central organization can account for every single variable. And you have to account for every single variable because otherwise one of those variables are going to fuck you. And that's the problem, is the only system that we know about, and I would say the only system, is a free market which is able to allow every single person to deal with their own variables without interference, and then those variables will end up meshing together. And yes, mistakes are going to happen. I think market crashes will happen even in a perfect capitalist society. I think market crashes are inevitable. And I think anyone who says that there's a way to escape them is lying, or is going to get something, or is going to create a system which is going to generate something worse than market crashes. I'd much rather have the Great Depression than the Great Chinese Famine.
Yeah, no, holy moly. I recently got off a binge of Frank Dickotter's. This is me being lazy and not buying the book again. But Frank Dickotter is like the historian on the Chinese Revolutionary era. And the way he describes the sort of what do they call it, like a death quotas. So you have to kill a certain number per 1,000 of people just to satisfy the minimum quantity of terror required to keep people docile and cooperative, and then everyone just sort of competes to exceed the quota they're given until instead of 3 per 1,000, it's 3 per 100, and they're just sort of burying giant sectors of the population to satisfy central planning again.
I think that's also a big problem with quotas, is that central planners have to use this idea of quotas where they basically arbitrarily thumbsuck a number which they think will satisfy supply and demand and all that, when at the end of the day you don't really know, because the only real way of knowing is by bouncing price signals. To answer the question in chat, are we talking about crashes or recessions? I would say both. I'm basically referring to the general idea of market failure. The problem is markets can't actually fail because markets don't have goals. You can't fail at something if you don't actually have a goal. The market is the default state of human nature, of human interaction. It just exists. It's like saying, is the wind failing? And and also, if you look at it, you could say that nature doesn't actually ever fail. Yes, ecosystems are destroyed, but that's because of pretty much because of intervention by other actors, not just humans. Animals destroy nature all the time. Elephants decimate ecosystems. That's just how shit happens. And I think, to be a little bit maybe Lovecraftian here, the universe doesn't really care about us.
Yes, that's certainly one way of looking at it. I think
10K, that's how many potatoes we need. We need 10,000 potatoes to feed the billions of people. This is actually one of the reasons that one of the causes of the Chinese famine is that because they would be rewarded based on their reports of how much grain they had produced, they would overinflate how much grain each collectivized farm had produced. So then the cities were like, well, yay, you guys have such a surplus, we can take a lot of more food then to feed the cities. So then they brought all this food into the cities and leaving these farming communities with nothing.
Yeah, I mean, you saw it as well in Moscow when they forced Ukraine to maintain certain grain quotas to feed Moscow. And then people who so much as picked a grain of wheat off the street in Minsk were shot dead on the spot.
Exactly.
A lot of sort of a lot of sort of fuss is made about Robert Mugabe and his taking of white farms, but I mean, people forget that he actually experimented with collectivization throughout the 1980s and 90s, and constant, complete disaster, unrelenting, ridiculous bullshit. And then they had to get the commercial farming sector to subsidize the collective farming sector that was going to seed. It's predictable as the sunrise. It really is.
Exactly.
And yet we're doing it again in South Africa. And the thing that is that caused a lot of did cause a lot of despair for me until I sort of, for my own part, picked something like Cape Independence to sort of nail my colors to, was that the vast majority of people in South Africa are very, very married to the basic moral principle, the basic sort of moral opinions that justify this inevitable march towards Mugabenomics.
I think the big problem in South Africa with our politicians is that they all, I'll go back to what I mentioned about Marxists, and the greatest strength is they don't know what they're doing. They don't know, and they don't understand their own beliefs, and they don't understand reality. So all they do is they understand talking points, and they can just echo out those talking points, and they do not engage with the reality. So there's no way that they can test their own. So whenever we say, look at what happened in Russia, look at what happened in China, Venezuela, Zimbabwe, they don't understand how to deal with that because it's been ingrained into them.
Because they really believe it wasn't real socialism because of that whole bloody Trotskyist movement.
I don't think they even believe it was real socialism. I think that they just believe, well, it will work here, or, well, they don't even engage with the facts. So I'm friends with a DAA member of parliament, and he was saying that he loves what we do. He agrees with us. But the problem is that most politicians, the 99.9% of them, don't know what the hell we're saying. Even when we go the most basic we can, they don't understand what we're talking about because these people won a popularity contest. They don't know anything about how to run a country, how to think about these sorts of ideas, how economies work, how society works. We are being ruled by idiots. And this is not just South Africa. I would say South Africa is worse than other countries, but most of the countries in the world are run by the lowest common denominator.
Yeah, Boris Johnson was particularly disappointing for me.
I find him hilarious. So as a comedian, I appreciate him.
No, I mean, he comes to power on this big ticket of, cutting wasteful spending and reducing immigration and building national sovereignty. And then he opens the borders and he becomes the most profit government spender since Michael Foot. And it's the most extraordinary disappointment. And the thing is, I heard an interesting description of him from one of his sort of childhood friends who said that he doesn't live by ideology. He sees himself in the vein of ancient Greek heroes. So merely it's all about completing the next challenge, whatever the hell that is. So if you defy him in the right way, you can get him to defeat you in the way that you want him to.
Yeah.
So,
it's actually one of those. Sorry. Are you familiar with virtue ethics?
Yes, I'm a big fan. Alistair McIntyre and so on. Yeah.
Yeah. No, my big problem with it is I find that it doesn't really deal with what I want to get out of ethics, because it defines how you should be as a person, but I see ethics as more how should you interact with other people. If morality is only needed when there's one person plus one person. If there's only one person, morality is irrelevant. It's about interaction between people and within society.
Yeah, but I mean, personally, from my perspective, I think that's actually the one thing that virtue ethics is strong on, is its ability to create virtues that allow you to function very well in society with others. It picks up on that much more keenly, whereas the sort of modern way of looking at it as a sort of generalized formula tends to be very abstract and operates off sort of contextually removed thought experiments rather than embedded analyses of how society functions and how people really interact with non-rational principles and non-rational urges.
I think the big problem with academic morality altogether, and this actually applies to every single one, is that ethics deals. Also, my way that I define ethics as opposed to morality is that morality is how we act in general, and most of us can agree: don't kill the baby. Let's leave the baby over there. Don't strangle the baby and steal its candy. Most of us can agree with that. Ethics deals with train cars and should you pull the lever and
Yeah.
lie to a murderer, even though lying is bad. And I think that most of the time, it's quite ironic that intuitionism is probably one of the best ethical systems. The problem is that it has no actual concreteness to it because it just says, well, we kind of just do stuff. But that's not sufficient for academics. You can't really write a paper on that.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I'd pick up on there, because you're talking about these sort of thought experiments, is that they teach you to think very much in terms of just the individual and his interaction with single acts that have a limited envelope of consequence.
So can you repeat that part? I got distracted by seeing my name in the comments.
No, I was saying, so what you're talking about with ethics is it's the sort of standard way that people in academia deal with moral problems. They're saying, well, if I were to do that, would it be wrong or right? You know, all of these appeals to how people are intuitively thinking, but then they're also training you to think as an isolated individual dealing with isolated incidents that have a limited envelope of consequence.
And that's the problem. I think that it goes back to actually when I was discussing how I present morality in the Kat Drummond series is real morality is messy. You can't really tie it down to a set of an algorithm. An AI can't, well, AI in its current form cannot understand morality. You cannot mathematize it. And that is something that a lot of philosophers just don't like because they want to mathematize it. They want to list it. They want to have they want to have bullet points of what you do. They want a formula. Exactly. It's a big problem with it is so the main debate in ethics would probably be between deontology and utilitarianism. And I'd say that the problem with all that is any form of consequentialism, utilitarianism included, requires an a priori principle to define how do you measure the success of a consequence. So consequentialism itself requires deontology. It requires a teleologicalism, whatever. It's been a while since I did this.
Well, everything rests on axiomatic principles.
Yes,
Everyone just sort of, there's stuff that people just believe, and they're not willing to relinquish those beliefs based on reasoning, but only through episodes of rather severe trauma.
Exactly. At the same time, there is a problem with pure deontology in that we do measure scenarios by their consequences. And that's the big problem is that there's too much teleological measurement. There is this huge problem where people want to say you can only be utilitarian, you can only be deontological, when both of them by themselves, I'd say, are kind of wrong because it's a little bit of both, because it's messy. We simultaneously do care about if you're going to kill someone, what consequences is this going to have? Is this going to result in pain for me? Is this going to result in a breakdown society? Is it going to result in some sort of biological part of my brain saying you gone doofed? And at the same time, we're also informed by the principles that measure if consequences are good or not. Utilitarianism itself, the idea of utility, is a priori. And at the same time, though, the idea of don't kill someone is measured by the consequence of someone not dying.
It's interesting that you're bringing up that kind of gunpoint, those gunpoint sort of issues, because the one fellow who frames the morality of limited government in those terms, Robert Nozick, talks specifically about the redistribution of wealth for any end as being violent robbery. You are threatening to kill, maim, or imprison someone if they don't give you something that you can use to do something else with. And hence making democratic redistributionism essentially no more than mobbing people.
Exactly. That's actually one of the main problems with democracy is, so I will tell people one of my favorite Winston Churchill quotes is that democracy is the worst system except for all the others. Because I'm not a fan of democracy, but at the same time, I think that it has particular values which work from what we can implement right now.
Yeah.
I think definitely the mobbing thing. I think democracy is ruled by the mob, and it's harder to reform away from it because it has its own consent. If you have a single dictator, generally the masses can agree, we don't like this guy, we're going to overthrow him, or we're just going to stop listening to him. Seldom ever that. But the thing about democracy is we're technically ruling ourselves, so there's no way to actually overthrow it. But at the same time, this doesn't mean that monarchy is the answer, which I see a lot of people who are saying, libertarianism is weak, and they embrace this thing called the Dark Enlightenment, where they're basically becoming... And the problem with this is, yes, a lot of kings and queens were great, but a lot were also really bad. And just because you're going to get a few really good monarchs doesn't mean you're going to be guaranteed to get good monarchs. And a lot of the time, it's that the common meme that strong men create good times create weak men, and that's the cyclical thing where a good monarch tends to beget a bad monarch. And a lot of the theories that say that people who are trained, it's a person who's being trained to become a ruler. But I'm like, well, okay, fair enough. We actually have those already for bureaucracies. You don't need a monarchy for that. And at the same time, as much as it might be nice to have the idea of a reluctant ruler who's, because he doesn't want power, he's going to be really good about it. No, a lot of the time you just have some spiteful person who's just going to ignore their duties because they didn't actually want the job in the first place. I don't think monarchy is the answer. I don't think the democracy is the answer either. I don't think there is a perfect answer, but I think that there are small little reforms which we can make along the way in order to improve things. And I would say I'd much rather trust a well-oiled meritocratic bureaucracy than a system that just guarantees a ruler through birth, effectively, or popularity contest. The problem is who appoints the bureaucrats, and that's always the bad thing. That's always the question at the end of the day is who appoints that first bureaucrat who's well trained to then appoint the other people, and by what measurement system are we are we measuring merit?
Yeah, one of the things that I would bring up at this point is this is all very well and good. These theories are very attractive, but the context in which we are dealing with now is not a society in which people share our basic axiomatic principles on which we are justifying all of these nice castles in the sky. We're dealing with South Africa, and so I suppose the question anyone would ask you at this point would be, how would you apply those principles to the current context that we live in as South Africans?
I think South Africa as a country and a society is inherently broken. I think that for all my love, my British imperialism, I think the worst thing they ever did was unionizing South Africa, not only the trade unions, but making it into a union in 1910. I do not think that this country can support the institutions. Yes, makes triangle signs with... Yes, I am... No, Freemasons are much better than Illuminati. But I don't know how to make a Freemason sign, so I can't do that. So I do not think there's a way to fix South Africa as a full country. I think that as a region, the best thing, the ideal, if I was God Emperor and I could do whatever I wanted, I would split up South Africa into many different nations. There'd definitely be a Cape Republic. There'd probably be a Zulu Kingdom or a Zulu Republic, depending on what they want. And then I'd basically allow different population groups throughout the country to start picking out what the landmass that they want for their little community. Are you still here? It says that there's a okay. No, there was an error message that popped up, but it's gone now. So I presume it's that's all fine.
Mm-hmm.
And I would then firstly referendums along the ground. I don't like referendums, but I'm God Emperor now, so I can make referendums work. And they're going to pick out what society, what countries they want, where they want to live. So some places would inevitably probably move in and merge with. I don't like the problem with the word cantons. So these aren't. Is that they would still be a part of the same country. I don't want these to be the same country. I don't want there to be a central government, because I think that a central government run by South African institutions would inevitably a move towards authoritarianism and incompetent authoritarianism. So my ideal would be so that Southern Africa is split into all these different countries which more accurately represent political realities on the ground. And then after that, but with not the EU, because the EU is too bureaucratic, but with basically agreements for free trade and free movement. And the reason for that is that none of us are actually capable of running a state without each other's help. Okay. So the best thing to do is the delegation of labor and efficiency. So we work together, but under our own authorities. Cape Republic is the one I'm supporting, definitely. And I will support any secession movement in South Africa because I believe that we need to destabilize this country even more so they can finally stop pretending that it exists. And so they can finally stop pretending the South African empire exists and should exist, so we can actually just start fixing things on the ground. My policies that would apply to a Cape Republic, because that would be the one I would be living in, would be free markets, minimal regulations. If I'm God Emperor, I would not eliminate a welfare state immediately because I don't think people are ready for that, but I would start ushering it out over a generational thing, start lessening it. And it would be a small government. I may go for a canton system, but there's a lot of political issues if you go deep into the secession politics of the different secessionist movements talking to each other. I've gotten to the point where I'm like, I like canton systems in theory, but it's too controversial. I'm just not going to talk about it. It's kind of like the flag debate. I do not enter the flag debate.
Yeah, no, sounds like you're playing the perfect Anglo, standing back from the whole thing and saying, well, I'll pick one of you when I'm voting.
No, so I've been working with the Cape Secessionist movement quite a while, and with the different movements, and I've been interacting with them for a long time. And there's a lot of irritating things holding back different movements. A lot of different clashing personalities. But a big problem is just arguments over petty stuff, like which are ultimately irrelevant. Like when they discuss what form are we going to be a monarchy? Like some people want to have a monarchist Cape, and I'm like, we're not going to have a monarchy, guys. Like there's been too many waves of democracy. I don't care how much you want to have a Cape King; it's not going to happen. Then there's things like they'll discuss, we want a canton system, and then they end up putting more effort into arguing for a canton system than they do for secession. And I tell them, guys, let's get a Cape Republic first. Then you can start a canton party to lobby to get a canton system in the country. And so there's a lot of people are focusing more on what comes after than how to get there. And I must say, guys, we are far from getting there. We need to crawl before we can run.
We haven't even secured the N2. I think we need to be a little bit more cognizant about the limits of our power here and focus on practicality, as you said. Well, on that note, I unfortunately have to end this stream. Although it would be lovely to chat again if we could.
Yeah, definitely, pleasure.
Do you have any parting remarks for the eager crowd that we've assembled here?
Well, I think I'll do some marketing. If you guys are interested in reading urban fantasy set in Cape Town, in a magical post-apocalyptic South Africa, so technically a utopia because the ANC is not in charge, you check out the Kat Drummond series on Amazon.
Yes,
there may be zombies, but there's no communists.
The link is in the description, both to your Amazon page for all of your novels and to your author page on the Rational Standard if people want to see your political writings.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Excellent. Well, good night, everybody.